Let's try that again. Good evening, everybody, if there's anyone even watching. Uh, Tonight is supposed to be a Warhammer 40K lore stream, and it was intended to pay back Jimmy Bones and his crew for indulging me in my questions yesterday about the Dragon Ball Z franchise, or Dragon Ball franchise, whatever the appropriate term is. But apparently everyone else had other things going on that were of higher importance for the evening. No real skin off my nose there, just kind of irritating. But I'm going to go ahead and go on with the show. And for any of you who remember late last year, I did a few different streams on the subject of Warhammer 40,000 and did a couple of hobby streams that were kind of moderately well received. So tonight is intended as essentially a part one of two. Tonight I will be going over the pre-Horus Heresy history, that's a mouthful, of the Space Marine legions. And then next week, quite possibly going over the main event from the Warhammer 40K background that everyone wants to talk about, and that is the heresy itself. Now, first of all, anyone in the chat, please give me a 1 if I'm coming across clearly, or a 2 if my audio sounds like absolute garbage. Because I'm getting reverb. I think it's just my headset, but I'm not sure. All right, St. Louis Arch, thank you very much. And I'm going to go ahead and put the link for the StreamYard into the chat box. So if people would like to join in, either because they are curious about 40K in general, or if they know about the subject and just like to have a conversation about it, you're welcome to join in. All I ask is that you have a YouTube-friendly screen name and minimum of audio avatar and decent audio capability. So without further ado, we're first off going to ask and answer the question, what is a Space Marine in Warhammer 40,000? The simple answer is a Space Marine is a heavily modified human being who has been genetically and technologically enhanced to the point where they are no longer fully human. And biologically, they're still essentially human, but they have been modified to the point where, in some cases, it could be argued they are organic machines. One of the Warhammer 40K novels that I have actually describes Space Marines as brainwashed sociopaths. And it's not far from the truth. Anyone who's been in the military, you've probably met some guys who have been in combat for so many tours and for so long that they have forgotten how to interact outside of a combat situation. Space Marines are kind of like that, only turned up to 11. These guys are so far removed from civilian life and how to actually be human that they could almost be considered their own separate species of humanity. Albeit one that cannot reproduce naturally. At its core, a Space Marine is a human male that has had several biological and technological implants put into his body from roughly age 12 until sometime around age 18, maybe 20, depending on the chapter or legion that we're talking about. These implants range from things that allow a Space Marine to survive in extreme environmental conditions to implants that allow him to essentially never have to sleep, where they can actively turn off parts of their brain when they need to stay in combat operations for extended periods of time. In AMM43, another way to look at it is somebody took the idea of the perfect soldier, threw some Star Wars ideas into the mix, and created the Space Marines, which the Star Wars element can definitely be seen in some of their armor patterns, which I will be showing pictures of here shortly. But their basic weaponry and equipment loadout is a suit of era appropriate powered battle armor. If you've played the Fallout games, think of it as a much more advanced version of the Brotherhood of Steel's armor from that franchise. Space Marine power armor is generally sealed in such a way where these guys can operate not only in toxic weapon environments, but also in the vacuum of space, or, well, some cases even in environments that are even more extreme. There's a couple stories where Space Marines engaged in an infiltration mission into an active volcano. How that works, I don't know, but hey, sci-fi shenanigans. Now, in 40K history, officially, there were originally 20 Space Marine legions, each one with about 20,000 men. At some point before the events of the Horus Heresy, 2 of those legions were erased in an act of censorship so effective that the Imperium has never been able to replicate it. Do they have tweaking to their armor to perform those tasks? I'm going to say the answer to that is maybe. There are various marks of power armor over the course of the Warhammer 40K universe timeline. The very earliest armor wouldn't be all that dissimilar in concept to the power armor from the Fallout games, whereas the most current quote-unquote modern ones from the current edition of the game are things that I don't even want to try to figure out how the technology works. It is that weird in the way it's described and how it seems to work. What I can tell you is that one of the primary forms of what could be considered elite soldier is a Space Marine that is equipped with what's known as Terminator armor, which is heavy plate that was originally designed to clean the interior of engine power reactors for starships and massive power generators in space stations and planetary bases. Going to go ahead and jump into the different legions. And I have a nice little infographic here that shows this is the Heresy era color palettes for each of the 18 legions we will be discussing this evening. Now, I am going to admit I have some bias here. When I play either Horus Heresy or 40K, I tend to prefer to run the Blood Angels and the Dark Angels, aka the 1st Legion and the 9th Legion. And both of them are hardcore loyalist Space Marine legions and chapters. As far as the other ones, fully half of the Space Marine legions turned traitor during the events of the Horus Heresy, which will be discussed at a later time. Let me see if I can blow that up a little bit, make it somewhat easier for you guys to see some of the detail. Okay, that's too much. All right, that's going to have to do. So I happen to have a copy of the current edition of the Warhammer Horus Heresy Age of Darkness rulebook here. I'm gonna give you the out of the book blurb that gives the introduction to these legions as we get to them, and I'm gonna give you my thoughts on the individual legions themselves. I'm also gonna go into a little bit of detail on their Primarchs, but truth be told, the Primarchs alone probably each deserve a show or a stream of their own, because many of them have got some incredibly detailed backstories, and some of them are really quite tragic. Now, the first topic we are going to be talking about is the First Legion, the Dark Angels. Now, again, this is one of the two legions / chapters I do play. Here is their introductory blurb. Stark and uncompromising, the Dark Angels were the first of the Emperor's legions, and the truest to the mold from which the legions of Astartes had been struck. They were killers of the purest and most refined kind, for whom there could be no other destiny but a lifetime of war and death in the name of the Imperium and mankind. They did not build empires. They made no attempt to master the ways of peace or the subtle skills of the artist, craftsman, or diplomat. They offer no excuses for their nature and make no compromises in the pursuit of their assigned duty, shirking neither the price they paid in blood nor that paid in infamy in solitude. Their greatest battles were to be found in no catalogue of compliance or roll of honor. No scholars or poets sing of these glories or remember those fallen in their prosecution, for they fought against foes so monstrous that it was deemed necessary that all mention of them be erased from history. Such is the nature of their service, not only to be prosecutors of the Great Crusade, but also to serve as the Imperium's most potent bulwark against the unknown terrors that lurk in the darkness between the stars. Their Primarch is an individual known as Lion L. Johnson. He is literally the wild child that you hear legends of. He Broken Pine, I hope you're enjoying the show. And I know it's probably not going to be something that's quite up your alley, but if you enjoy it, cool, leave a like. If you don't, go ahead and downvote me. I'll know not to do these streams again. But the Lionel Johnson, again, he's one of the Primarchs I actually do know a little bit about. He was raised in a jungle on his own. He essentially was found as a wild man in the forest, was able to be quote unquote domesticated and trained in the ways of war that was common to the knightly orders of Caliban. And through political guile, a hunter's acumen that surpassed pretty much everyone else on the planet, and just sheer bloody-mindedness, he managed to not only conquer his world, but he managed to do so in such a way where the average citizenry no longer had to fear going out into the forests of that planet. And MM43, in 40K, the Geneva suggestions don't even exist as toilet paper. I'm just going to be honest with you. Some of the weaponry these guys utilize, the Geneva Convention would look at that and go, I don't even know where to begin quantifying how much of a bad idea this is. But we're going to go ahead and move on. All right, the Second Legion is one of those that was expunged, so we're jumping straight into the Third Legion, the Emperor's Children. Oh, what disappointments these guys are. But let's get to the blurb. The legionaries of the Emperor's Children have always strived to be exemplars above all others in the arts of war. paragons of martial virtue and excellence, scorning those who did not meet their extreme standards. This led them to seek perfection in war as a fluid, lightning-quick force, whose battles were preordained victories brought about by a combination of acute strategic planning and flawless execution. Always they sought greater challenges against which to prove themselves and attained greater glories in turn. From this vaunted height, the Third Legion would descend into treachery and become the lowest and most vile creatures, enslaved to pride and consumed by desires no natural power could fulfill. The history of the Legion's deeds before its fall is not simply a history of what was and what it achieved, but a history of how it created its own doom. For as the ancient texts say, pride goeth before destruction, and seldom has this proverb been more apt than in the case of the Third Legion. Their, their primarch was Fulgrim, and he was, before turning to the path of the traitor, a space marine who he excelled in just about everything he did. Art, poetry, sciences, politics. If he turned his mind to something, he mastered it with relative ease. His legion actually started turning to chaos when they were involved in a war against a alien race that was kind of a mix between a human and snake. I'm not going to go into details because it is definitely not YouTube friendly, but he managed to find a very special sword in what could be best described as a snake orgy temple. Don't ask me to repeat that because I will not. He picked up this sword after walking across the writhing carpet of the serpentine aliens and picked it up, looked around, and told his space marines just to wipe out the remnants, and then he left. Not knowing that the voice that was now talking to him in the back of his head was the demon that inhabited the jewel in the sword. Over the course of the next several months to possibly years, he turned more and more debauched until finally his legion turned completely to one of the chaos deities known as Slanesh. Essentially, these guys are the embodiment of what happens if you go too far down the road of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Some of their specialists even have weapons that started out life as musical instruments and got modified to the point where them just tuning their guitar now can wipe out an entire city block. Not exactly people you would want to invite over for a family barbecue. We're going to move on to the Fourth Legion now. Sadly, also traitors. These are the Fourth Legion Iron Warriors. The Fourth Legion was the cold-hearted battering ram of the Great Crusade, a maul used to tear down impregnable fortresses or unassailable citadels that dared to stand in the path of the Emperor's will. The Iron Warriors became a byword for relentless, punishing warfare and mastery in siegecraft, both in defense and in assault. They took no pleasure in their duty, nor did they shirk from it. They saw war only in terms of cold logic, ensuring that the arithmetic and calculus of bodies and machines sent to the meat grinder was always made to balance in their favor. Defeat was anathema to them, and victory was worth any price paid in blood. The Fourth Legion was ever dutiful, ever reliable, but never lauded. It was a legion deserving of every glory enjoyed by its brothers, but time and again was overshadowed, a shining blade blunted in the mud of 100 worlds. During the crusade in which they served, resentment fostered in their hearts. These guys were, let's just be honest, these guys were seriously overlooked. These were the foot sloggers in World War I. who would dig the trenches that would then dig the trenches, man the trenches, and then try to move forward and occupy the trenches of the other guy. Often through hails of machine gun fire that were utterly horrendous. They are so dedicated to siegecraft and warfare that they don't even really apply much in the way of heraldry to their armor. Many of you have seen the silver skull symbol that Pop has as a hat pin. I'm pretty sure that's the Iron Warriors logo. Their Primarch, Perturabo, is actually probably one of the most tragic of the Primarchs for the traitor side, second only to Angron. But Angron is also something of a disappointing child to the Emperor. And I'm going to read this out of the book because, like I said, this is sad. Perturabo was a ruthless and effective warlord, a master strategist whose razor-edged mind could fathom the hidden weaknesses in any enemy and exploit it with savage and decisive action. His capacity for learning was incredible, and his intellectual curiosity insatiable. He was gifted above all others in scientific and technological intelligence. However, from the outset, he was a distant, calculating mastermind who cared not for others, nor readily deigned to explain his actions or intentions. This mattered little in the context of his use as a weapon for the Great Crusade, however, for Perturabo was formidable, and he could deconstruct and overcome any obstacle or cast down any foe. When united with his legion, he reviewed their record and their doctrines against the legions of his brothers, and he found them wanting. It was not enough. It was not enough for Perturabo that they were merely superior. Their failing was that amongst the legions they were not already supreme. His punishment was decimation, putting 1 in 10 of his legion's warriors to death. While outsiders were horrified by this seemingly wasteful action, to Perturabo it was a calculated and cathartic act, purging his legion and by extension of himself of the weakness which pervaded it, and proved to all that he was the first among his brothers in ruthlessness, decisiveness, and willpower. Perturabo landed on a planet that was essentially a more mechanically inclined version of ancient Greece or Rome. It was a collection of city-states that the city-state that his adopted father ran was the biggest one on the planet and one of the most powerful ones on the planet. Because of how rapidly he grew to maturity, he was seen as the ultimate warrior and the ultimate siege master by his adopted father. The only one of his adopted siblings that showed him any kind of kindness was his sister. And what eventually happened with them is beyond tragic and will be covered when we talk about the Horus Heresy at some point in the future. Because it is a real kick in the teeth. But there were times when Perturabo wanted nothing more than to be designing and building aqueducts, schools, or any other kind of civic structure that would be beneficial to people. And we got a new guest. Welcome, Brian.
Howdy.
I assume you're Cliff's brother?
Yes, I am.
Alrighty. How much do you know about the Warhammer 40,000 universe?
I know nothing, but I'm willing to learn.
All right, so feel free to jump in with questions. I don't know how much you've already heard from the initial part of the stream, but tonight we are discussing the 18 legions of Space Marines, leading up to talking about the war known as the Horus Heresy, possibly as early as next week.
Cool.
So, quick summation for you. The Space Marines, genetically engineered super soldiers that make the Spartans from Halo look like you and me.
Oh, wow.
You were military, correct?
Yeah.
What branch?
Army.
What MOS?
I was a truck driver,
Alrighty.
so I was
A
logistics.
Space Marine in 40K is as combat effective compared to a Spartan from Halo as a Mossad agent is to you or me.
Oh
I was
goodness.
chemical. I was chemical. Each of the legions we are going to be talking about had their own specialties and their own peculiar ways of waging conflict
Uh-huh.
that only got ramped up to 11 when their Primarchs got found.
What are Primarchs?
Primarchs are essentially commanding generals / genetic templates of the 20 Space Marine legions.
Okay.
So when you talk about well, let's go ahead and pick on the one that I've already kind of beat on, but I like doing it because they're filthy traitors and I love picking on them. The Third Legion, the Emperor's Children, they turned traitor. They were originally a legion that focused on being the perfect warriors. If they found a method of combat, they did everything in their power to perfect that method of combat and either incorporate it into their tactical acumen,
Mm-hmm.
or they would dump it.
So, like,
And
whenever they learn something new that would improve their skill set, then they would take the old stuff and forget about it and just focus on the new.
they wouldn't forget about it. They would incorporate it.
Oh, okay.
This is something that I'm going to touch on a little bit more in depth on the Horus Heresy stream.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the Emperor's Children's company captains was a character by the name of Lucius. He specialized in swordsmanship.
Mm-hmm.
And he was described as probably the best swordsman in the Third Legion.
Okay.
In fact, he is still alive in the 41st millennium, 10,000 years after the heresy.
Oh, okay.
But not necessarily because of the fact that he is a great swordsman. It's because of warp shenanigans and the fact that the deity that his legion decided to sell their souls to finds it amusing that he is so good at what he does. Hey, Rhino, how you doing?
Hi, Rhino.
And Chris, are you referring to Fulgrim or Lucius? Because both of them fit that description, but for different reasons.
So each legion,
Mm-hmm.
that's just like a division, right? Like first
Marine
infantry
legion,
division.
Every Space Marine legion in 40K was essentially, you could call it a division, but that's kind of a watering down of what they were. They were designed for specific methods of warfare and specific operations. The Blood Angels were one of the close assault specialists. The Dark Angels were kind of intended as executioners and decapitation strike specialists.
So then would these then technically be a battalion?
You could
Because you got division, brigade, battalion, company, platoon.
You could kind of consider that to be the case.
Okay.
Space Marine legions prior to the Horus Heresy kicking off were roughly 10,000 strong.
So that would be about a brigade.
Yeah, and each legion
or two brigades.
Each legion was essentially authorized to recruit however they deemed appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And when their Primarchs were found, they were allowed to change their legion's operating styles to whatever suited their means best. So when the Primarch Lehman Russ was found, his legion, which had been very much the already a jump in, beat everyone to death, and jump out, turned into a much more extreme methodology on that.
Mm-hmm.
Although they also were space Vikings. Rhino would love them.
Anything Viking is awesome.
Yeah, I'm not going to deny that one. But we're going to go ahead and jump back into what I was talking about with Perturabo and the 4th Legion.
Okay.
Like I had said before you jumped on, he wanted nothing more than to just be a civil engineer. And he would design things that were absolutely amazing architectural feats. And both his adopted father on the planet he was found on and the Emperor, his quote unquote real dad, only wanted him to work on war. All right, like I said, he is one of the more tragic of the Space Marine Primarchs that turned to the dark side, in my opinion. And he also, the only friendship he ever truly had was from his adopted sister, who betrayed him at a later stage in his life. But that's not something we're going to touch on hugely because that jumps way ahead in the story.
So I'm going to real quick interrupt.
Yep.
I'm just looking at the legions. What happened to Legion 2?
Yes. All right, there's kind of a running joke. Legion 2, and I think it's Legion 18, were utterly expunged.
Oh, okay.
Something happened that the Emperor decided was so egregious that the Primarchs may or may not be dead. And, oh, thank you, MM43. And yeah, I could have just looked at the chart and just read through it. The 2nd and the 11th. But they did, there's something so egregious happened that the Emperor erased them, erased all records of them. You can't find Jack on them, no matter where you go in the Imperium. Although rumor has it that somewhere hidden under the Imperial Palace on Terra, there might be a cell holding one of those 2 missing Primarchs. That may now be empty.
Okay.
How true that is, don't know, don't care. It's a cool mystery in a galaxy that's full of them.
So when you say like a dark side, the dark side, is it similar to like Star Wars with the Jedi and then the Sith, where it's light and dark?
I use the term dark side to kind of differentiate the fact that these guys turned to forces that are unequivocally evil.
Okay.
In 40K and 30K, technically there are no good guys. It's there, just like in the Riddick universe, it's all
Yes.
shades of gray.
Yes.
Because in real life, we would not consider Richard Riddick to be a good guy in any definition of the word.
Yeah.
In the movies, though, he is a good guy.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, he's trying to survive, but basically, he's trying to make sure people around him don't die just because of the fact that they're going to be useful to him to get the hell out of wherever he is.
Exactly.
Kind of the same thing here, unfortunately, when it comes to some of the Space Marine legions.
Okay.
Because the Dark Angels, one of the 2 that I play, yeah, they come across as the good, noble knights that you would love to have fighting along with you.
Mm-hmm.
But the truth of the matter is, they were not nice guys. In fact, anyone who comes too close to finding out their secrets has a mysterious accident where their ship may or may not survive exiting into the warp.
Oh, so it's kind of like if you betray Putin, you kind of fly out of a window.
Yeah, something like that. Or you have the Hillary Clinton files.
Yes.
So, are they good guys? Yeah, they're good guys in the fact that they're loyal to humanity and the Emperor. But when you look at them under a microscope, are they really the good guys?
They do what benefits them the most.
Exactly. And that's a running theme throughout 40K. It's all shades of gray.
Yeah.
And I honestly love it because in real life there is no such thing as a true good guy.
Yeah.
But we are moving on to the 5th Legion, which, yay, we're back to loyalist territory. Woohoo! I'm a loyalist. I do not
Okay.
like the filthy traitors. The 5th Legion, Astartes, the White Scars. The warriors of the 5th Legion were the pathfinders of the Great Crusade, ever forging a path through uncharted territory far beyond the borders of the expanding Imperium, and often forgot about by the chroniclers that followed in the conquest's wake. Organized into small, mobile units, the 5th Legion ran before the armies of the Emperor during the final conquests on Terra, and then across the stars, sowing confusion and death amongst their foes. They were the swift blade that probed for weaknesses before a sudden and deadly strike, not the sledgehammer that some of their brother legions had become. Theirs was the lightning strike that struck from clear skies and withdrew without a trace, leaving only ashes behind. The White Scars were often overlooked and considered the outcasts of the Legio Astartes, operating so far afield that they were essentially culturally different from the Terran norm. Although alternatively disdained or unremembered by most, it would be the 5th Legion that would often overturn the scales of destiny itself. Now, when I say the name of their Primarch, try to guess where a lot of their inspiration came from. Jagatai Khan.
I have no clue.
They have a heavy cultural influence from the Mongols and other ancient horse warriors.
Okay, I can kind of see that in the armor.
Mm-hmm. I can't really zoom in much more without losing resolution,
Yeah.
but and there's a reason I'm not going into a huge amount of detail on Jagatai. It's because of the fact that, honestly, he wouldn't want it.
Yeah.
Jagatai Khan was one of those Primarchs who all he cared about was what the next mission was and what his next target was.
Spoken
And
like a true mercenary.
no, his whole thing was he constantly wanted to be on the move and on the hunt. He did not like being tied down for any longer than he had to be. And honestly, he was one of those that, as long as his opponent fought in a way that he considered honorable, he wouldn't completely take the gloves off. There's a story from one of the novels where they were fighting a collection of orcs on this planet, and one of the orc war bosses killed one of his favorite lieutenants in a way that he considered dishonorable. And then that war boss and all of his little buddies ran into a cave that had a tunnel on the other end that, well, his legion had already closed off and were essentially getting ready to storm it. He commented over the radio, "Nobody moves." And then all he did was walk to the entrance of the cave with this chainsword that he carried that was about the height of 2 men, just
wow.
basically doing warm-up exercises. And then he went in. Orcs tried running out the back end of the cave, and orcs don't run from a fight.
Yeah.
Well, as he was running, or as they were running out of the cave, eventually their war boss's head came bouncing out of the cave. And Jagatai came out following the last of the orcs, not a scratch on him, and the only blood present was the ichor from the orcs that he sliced and diced.
Huh.
Primarchs were not nice guys. And when you triggered whatever triggered for them, in whatever form it took, you didn't like what happened to you.
You more wanted to try to be on their nice side than their.
If they had a nice side, there's at least one of them who didn't have a nice side. Well, at one point he had a nice side that
Yeah.
got very brutally removed. We'll get to him soon enough. But Jagatai, he had an interesting little tradition amongst the people that he was raised by
Mm-hmm.
that he incorporated into the Legion when he got rejoined with them. It was called the victory rope. Every time they would go into battle, if they won the fight and didn't need to be medically extracted, they would cut a line on a scar line basically, and let it heal naturally. If they had to be medically extracted, or if they felt that they lost the fight, they would take dirt from that planet and rub it into the fresh scar. And the more honored members of the Legion had scar lines that were practically all one long white line. Jagatai was the only member of his Legion that had an unbroken line.
So it's kind of like how Predator would mark his inside of his mask whenever he won against an alien.
Exactly.
Okay.
It's really a cool thing. And again, all I'm giving you guys is a 20,000-foot wetting of the whistle with these guys. If me telling you guys these stories convinces you to go and look at one of the novels or look at some of the audio or video and audio stuff being produced by Games Workshop for this now, I consider that a win. Because while it's not necessarily deep lore, there's a lot of it. There's a lot of fun stories in this.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm finding it already interesting.
Okay, we are moving past the 5th Legion and onto the one that I think Rhino would love. Tell me, do you have a tankard that you use to drink from?
A what?
A tankard? An old style ale stein, basically?
Oh, not yet.
Well, that would be appropriate for this particular Legion. This is the Legion that embodies the Viking mentality, if any of them does.
Okay.
The 6th Legion, Space Wolves. The 6th Legion always remained apart from its fellows, its origins shrouded and its reputation fearsome. Unexpected violence was its calling card. The Legion's campaigns unsubtle but brutally swift. It was a peerless shock assault force, and tireless in both its pursuit and hunter-killer roles. Like its namesake, the Wolves of Old Earth, the 6th Legion's assault resembled a calculated exercises in ferocity, aimed to tear and rend until the foe lay in ruins or was driven to its death. The Legion's warriors were hunters who reaved a bloody path across the stars of the Great Crusade, but did not stray far from the shadow of the Emperor. The Space Wolves were kept under the tight control of the Imperial Court and unleashed at the Emperor's command as a bloody-handed tool of punishment. The warriors of the 6th Legion knew well that they were not builders of empires, nor were they the watchers on its walls, or lockstep soldiers who cared for bright pageantry. They were simply predators, as they had been made, and woe betide any who fell into their jaws.
So basically, they're like enforcers.
These are the Emperor's executioners. Remember what I said about the 2nd and the 11th, the missing
Yes.
or the expunged legions? It is rumored that these guys were the ones that pulled off the order to expunge those legions.
Okay, so they're like an enforcer, but
The, these are the Space Marines that the Emperor would call upon when other Space Marines needed to be chastised.
Oh, okay. So this is like the best of the best that are meant to take out the best.
Basically, imagine if we had a Delta Force that was designed to hunt down rogue members of Delta Force.
Okay.
And then give them a strong Viking theme and severe wolf fetishes.
Okay.
There is a running quasi joke among the 40K community that the Space Wolves are legitimate furries. Now, here's why that joke exists. They have a genetic curse called the Curse of the Wolfen, where as some of their warriors age, one, their teeth get longer, but two, something happened during the process of becoming a Space Marine that essentially turned them into werewolves that don't exactly change fully, but they also don't exactly maintain full sanity all the time.
Okay.
Fun fact, these guys are loyal. These guys did not turn traitor. And there are two of the novels written from differing points of view that describe when they were unleashed to do their job against one of their fellow legions. Now, Chris, why would you spread such obvious truths? One of the gags in one of the novels of the Horus Heresy is at least once a chapter in the book, someone says there are no wolves on Fedris. One of the units in the Space Wolf Codex is Thunderwolf Cavalry. So I'll leave that for you to decide if it's true or not. Again, we could talk about Primarch Lehman Russ in more detail, but we're not even halfway through yet, and he alone deserves a stream because for one of the legions I don't play, he is one of those that I definitely would consider at the very least a drinking buddy if he wasn't completely batshit battle mad.
Yeah. So, if I'm getting this right, the Space Wolves come from planet Earth, right?
No, none of these guys are based on Earth anymore.
Okay.
At one time, all the Space Marine legions were on Earth, but after, again, this is something that's going to be discussed in the Primarchs video, or not Primarchs, but Horus Heresy video, because it builds into the crescendo that is the Horus Heresy. The Primarchs were the genetic templates for each of the 20 Space Marine legions.
Yeah.
Something happened, and as infants, they were all punted to various planets in the galaxy.
Okay.
And the planet that each of them landed on influenced their personality and the eventual way their legion evolved to wage war.
Interesting.
And with the exception of one of the known ones, they all basically conquered their home worlds by the time the Emperor found them. Whether it be through political guile, military action, or a reign of terror. That one's a FUBAR story in and of itself.
Yeah.
But we go from a legion that is a bunch of almost literal party animals. Have you played Mass Effect?
No.
Okay. When you were in the service, I'm sure you knew at least one soldier who had a stick so far up his rectum that he could open his mouth and pull out a broom handle.
Yes.
This next legion would look at him and look at that soldier and go, amateur. The 7th Legion, Imperial Fists. The Imperial Fists were driven foremost by the ideals of unity. They stood alone as a pillar of stability upon which the foundations of the Imperium were built. They were ever true, unswerving from the toll demanded by war, and bearing the weight of loyalty without breaking. To the Imperial Fists, no sacrifice in the line of duty was too grave, and they refused to flinch in the fulfillment of their oaths. They were the noblest exemplars of the highest ideals and aspirations of humanity, and for this reason they stood by the Emperor's side more than any other legion during the Great Crusade, as instruments of his will. And in the Imperium's time of greatest need, it would be the unyielding Imperial Fists who were its final defense. Theirs was a legion of stoic crusaders, architect war masons, and voidsmen without equal. The Imperial Fists were masterful in both attack and defense, fighting with unshakable discipline and with methodical application of force. As the Imperium expanded ever outwards, they were to be found always at the leading edge, embodying the Great Crusade spirit and constructing mighty fortresses at the sites of their victories to act as much as garrisons as well as beacons of unification. Remember I said the Iron Warriors were the siege breakers?
Mm-hmm.
The Imperial Fists were the builders of fortifications. It was said that Perturabo could analyze any fortification and his legion could break it in a matter of months. Whereas Rogel Dorn, the Primarch of the 7th, could analyze a planet and decide the exact best way to build a defensive grid on that planet that could not be bested.
Wow.
He essentially built the palace on Terra that withstood Horus's legions when they finally reached Earth during the heresy. And he was the Primarch that bore the Emperor to the Golden Throne after the events of the heresy. His legion was the handpicked by the Emperor to maintain the Imperial defense on the throne world. Now, when I say these guys were uncompromising, every Space Marine Legion would adapt its tactics and techniques to what they were facing. The Fists would look at what was going on, and their calculation was, should it be 5 tanks, 10 tanks, or 30 tanks? They had all the subtlety of a brick attached to a rocket thrown through a window. Now, when it came to building a defensive bulwark, there was no one better. When it came to breaking a defensive bulwark, they were just as good. If you were to play chess against Rogel Dorn and manage to do an effective defense against him, he would smash the board and walk out. He so hated subtlety that he deliberately tracked down a pet project by the Emperor's second in command, essentially, and nearly erased the assassins from the Imperial rosters, even though they were under direct control of Malkador, the Emperor's second in command. It literally took the Emperor showing up and saying, "No, Rogel, go back to your corner. These guys are okay."
Dang.
Okay, remember I mentioned that one of the Space Marine Primarchs conquered his world through a literal reign of terror?
Yes.
We are about to talk about his legion, the 8th Legion Astartes, the Night Lords. Now, as I'm talking about this, I want you to picture Batman, given the enhancements I described already for a Space Marine, no compunction against killing. And tell me if what you imagine fits what these guys sound like. The 8th Legion, Night Lords. The 8th Legion was a force that shaped cruelty and fear into a weapon. It was known foremost for its disproportionate and merciless application of force. Its first blow an atrocity, pitched with such wanton brutality that it forced entire populations into abject surrender and desperation to avoid suffering the same fate. For foes who refused to capitulate, the Night Lords reserved a singular talent for murder. Its warriors were a grim function of necessity, a terrifying force of monsters created to drag a barbaric age. Jackal, please change your screen name to something a little more YouTube appropriate. Thank you.
God, I love Jackal.
Oh, yeah, he's a good kid. However, such monsters would not long stay leashed to the Imperium. Yes, these guys turned traitor. In its final days, the Legion would become an undisciplined mob that came to see cruelty as its goal and not the means to a worthy end. It was no longer a precise weapon of war, but an indiscriminate scourge, as was fitting a legion of such ill repute and terrible mien. It would not go meekly to meet its fate, nor accept without bloodshed an end to the path it had chosen to walk. Amid the turmoil and destruction of the heresy, the Legion would turn upon itself in an orgy of violence in an effort to sever itself from its singular curse, its own Primarch. Conrad Kurz, the Night Haunter, is the Primarch of this Legion. Now, before he was found, these guys were so barbaric that when a political entity on Terra managed to successfully rebel against the Emperor and regain independence from him, the Emperor's only response to the news was send in the 8th. 12 hours later, the leaders of the rebellion had been flayed alive and their skins draped across their Capitol building. Notice I said they were still alive.
Yes.
Their screams were broadcast throughout the entire city until they finally died and the citizenry decided, we're not rebelling anymore. No, we want to come back.
Ruthless.
The Emperor didn't let them come back. About a week later, that city was a necropolis. Conrad was worse than that. He landed on a world that was run by gang violence, murder, and just absolute insanity. Imagine Chicago turned to 1,000. Now imagine Batman dropped into that and deciding he's going to clean up that city. Again, no compunction against killing. Part of Conrad's problem is he had the curse of foresight. However, he always saw the worst possible outcome. He never saw a positive outcome from any of the futures he saw ahead of him. So he always thought he was justified in his barbaric and brutal actions. When he was found by the Emperor, and the Emperor said his name, Conrad's response was, no, sir, my people have given me a name, and that's not it. He called himself the Night Haunter. You're at a loss for words on this guy, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, did the mental image you had before I told you about this guy match?
No. It turned into Heath Ledger playing Joker. is what I now have pictured.
Yeah.
Where
If,
you're just
if
so
the,
sick and demented and twisted. It's
if the,
unbelievable.
if the 8th Legion were real and they were dropped against the Taliban in Afghanistan,
Oh, God.
the Taliban would be begging to be shot
Yes.
rather than be gotten a hold of by these guys. And you know their reputation.
Yeah, they can be pretty ruthless.
Well, we're going to move on to the other chapter that I played regularly. In
Hmm.
fact, I own the miniature for this particular Primarch. We are talking about the 9th Legion Astartes, the Blood Angels. The beatific warriors of the 9th Legion were the sons of transformation and duality, once the very worst of mankind, remade bright and true. Its legionaries were rage incarnate, unconstrained and wrathful, yet they were paladins of the highest nobility. By fate's will they were accursed, yet by their Primarch's hand they were blessed. They were once the basest of savages, but they rose above what they had been and stood astride the fledgling Imperium like the guardian angels for whom they were named. They were the most beautiful and the most terrifying warriors of the Imperium. In war, the Blood Angels were the incarnation of the Emperor's wrath upon those who rejected the gift of unity. Their coming was nothing less than apocalyptic judgment delivered from on high. Their arrival heralded by blazing assaults on the strongest points of enemy resistance, descending from the heavens on wings of fire, the Legion conquered by their preternatural fury, as well as by the dread and awe they created. They inspired their allies, and any enemy who witnessed the Blood Angels in battle were forced to their knees, cowering before the Legion's wrath and splendor, lest they too perish beneath the Legion's burning blades. Now, we're going to have some fun here.
Oh boy, I like to have fun.
Their Primarch.
So can I tell you real quick what I imagine when you said Blood Angels?
Fire away.
Huh?
Fire away.
So, back in the day when to torture somebody, they would split them open. And it looks like they had angel wings. That's what I picture these people doing.
They don't.
Aw.
They're not that savage.
Okay. So
right.
Are they more like shooting indiscriminately savage?
Let's get to that in a second. Let me tell you about their Primarch. Their Primarch is a legitimate angel. Sanguinius has angel wings. He's the only physical mutation among the Primarchs, aside from possibly Layman Russ details. His wings were strong enough that he could actually fly wearing power armor.
Wow.
Of all the Primarchs, he is the only one that is seen as actually a physical embodiment of male perfection. They are also space vampires.
Interesting.
You did not see that twist coming, did you?
No.
Okay. It is said that when the Emperor found Sanguinius also had the gift of foresight. He knew the Emperor was coming, but unlike his brother Conrad, he saw the positive. You have a good one, Slick. Sorry we bored you to death on this. He saw the positive outcomes as well as the negative.
Yeah.
Of the loyalists, he is probably the one that you will feel sorry for when you hear how his story ends. We're not going to go into huge detail, but he knew what his fate was before he entered the vengeful spirit.
Okay.
All Space Marines have an organ where they can ingest the flesh of their fallen foes and gain knowledge from that foe. How that works, I have no idea, because to my knowledge, or to my awareness, you cannot gain information by eating another creature.
Yeah.
But hey, sci-fi, magical, what the fuck?
Yeah. That's why it's sci-fi. It
Exactly.
happens.
Exactly. Well, the Blood Angels used to be known as the Revenants, or the Eaters of the Dead, or the Carnal Feast, because their conflicts, at the end of them, they would literally feast upon the flesh of their fallen enemies.
Interesting.
Now, when Sanguinius was located, he put a stop to that. He's like, no, you are better than this. You are going to be better than this. We are to be examples to the rest of humanity of what they can be. Every Blood Angel, in addition to being a warrior without peer in whatever form of combat they choose to specialize in, is also an artist of some kind when not on the battlefield. Sanguinius's armor was forged himself as not only a functional item of war, but a sculpture of peerless construction, basically. Are you needing to head out, Brian?
Yeah, the wife just needs me for like 10 minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah, we can go ahead and do a break if you'd like.
Okay, yeah, I'll be back in like 10 minutes.
All right, sounds good.
All right.
Unfortunately, guys, I don't yet have a tea break put together. So in the comments section, if anybody has any particular questions that are for any of the legions that we've already spoken of, feel free to ask. Or if you have any questions on the topic in general, go ahead and drop it in there. I will do what I can to answer it. Now, for any who are actually interested, while Brian's taking care of that, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the hobby cam and bring that forward. Because currently, I'm in the process of actually working on a armored transport / siege tank from the Horus Heresy era, known as a Land Raider Proteus. I'm going to be building one of the carrier variants because honestly, I like the fact that it has another gun gun available, and it can carry an additional 4 troops compared to the other version. MM43, that is a good question. I honestly don't know the answer, and I don't know many people who would even begin to guesstimate that answer. I imagine that it's a planet that both of them were from a planet that are planets that had been either wiped out or had been deliberately lost to Imperial records, but I have no idea. Like I said earlier, the purging of them was seen as the most effective censorship the Imperium has ever undertaken. Now, out of universe, rumor has it that those two legions were intended for players to create their own first founding Space Marine legions and thus have their own Primarch for it and their own background for it. And at some point, someone decided no, that would be an absolute abject nightmare to try to deal with. But it's still a interesting concept. Oh, and I am going to address something that is kind of an elephant in the room as far as 40K is concerned. There are no female Space Marines. I'm going to say that again, and I'm not going to say it slowly. There are no female Space Marines. Allegedly, there had been, in one of the earliest editions of 40K, there had been considerations of making female Space Marines, and nobody bought the models for them. So once 40K's second ed came out and they more or less solidified the background that would become the sci-fi universe many of us know and enjoy, female Space Marines just weren't a thing. Now, they eventually came up with a faction of power armored warriors that were all women called the Sisters of Battle that have many similar features to the Space Marines, but they don't have the genetic enhancements and they don't have a lot of the other stuff that make a Space Marine a Space Marine. But MM43, that, like I said, that is a good question. I don't have an answer to that. I don't know anyone who does have an answer to that. I like to suspect that at some point GW or Games Workshop will approve some novels that go digging into it. But I'm not going to hold my breath on that ever, or that occurring while I'm still actively involved in the hobby. All right, so are there any other questions pertaining to this topic that you all have? And Chris Mitchell, I greatly appreciate the input that you had there. I honestly didn't or hadn't pegged you as a 40K fan from some of the earlier conversations I sat in on with you. So I greatly appreciate being proven wrong. I personally think it's a somewhat underrated to a certain extent franchise when it comes to the fiction and the possibility for storytelling elements in it. And for anyone curious, I want to say that I'm literally brain farting. The guy who most recently played Superman is actually in the process of building a Warhammer 40K TV series. What form it's going to take, I don't know. I hope that it's going to be one of these things where he's taking the Eisenhorn novels and adapting them, because that would make for a great crime drama-esque series. But I'm waiting to see just what they come up with and how it's going to turn out. Because to a certain extent, GW has managed to protect itself from the woke. I'm hoping that it, or MM43, I'm hoping that would end up being the Inquisition. And like I said, doing something along the lines of a Law and Order type TV show. Because honestly, I think that would be the easiest way to introduce people into the nightmare future of Warhammer 40,000 in a TV format. And there's a few other novels that could be utilized for the baseline for a TV show or a movie. But the amount of background and lore, even though it's not deep, there's a lot there. And you would have a very hard time actually being able to make it something that the average viewer who has no knowledge of 40K would be able to follow without getting completely lost in the shuffle. Anyone who hasn't read any of the 40K novels that is interested in it, a few really good ones that I recommend are Dan Abnett's Necropolis. It's the third book of the Gaunt's Ghosts series. It follows an Imperial infantry regiment, essentially, as they are attempting to defend a city that is essentially a oversized version of Manhattan against an apocalyptic scale invasion by forces that they really should have had Space Marines there to fight with them. And speaking of Space Marines, if you want a story focused on the Space Marines and set in the period just before the Horus Heresy begins, the novel Horus Rising, also by Dan Abnett, if I remember correctly, is one that I highly recommend. It has several really awesome characters, and it covers events before Horus turned to evil. You know, honestly, MM43, that wouldn't surprise me. And honestly, if he were to do that, he'd probably get shoehorned into being Robute Gilliman in an Ultramarine. And if that's true, I'm going to be so disappointed. Of all the Loyalist legions and chapters, the Ultramarines are the ones that I have a absolute snooze fest every time every time they come up in a conversation. They're just so, in my opinion, so bog standard boring that it's not even close to funny. Now, Robute, since waking up after his 10,000-year nap, has been a little bit more interesting because the poor guy he's got Primarch grade depression, seeing what's happened to the Imperium since he got put into stasis. But whew, I have of all the Space Marine forces, the Ultramarines are the one I have the hardest time being enthusiastic over. they're in my opinion, they're just so bland. And if any of them are watching this at a later time, Jimmy Bones, MGTOW Outlaw, this, like I said in the Gilded, this was intended as a kind of a thank you stream for you guys being so patient with me talking about one of your favorite animes and hobbies. So I get it. You guys probably had other things available or that you were dealing with. I get that. I don't knock you for it. MM43, I'm going to need to ask you to clarify that. Imagine if he did. I'm assuming you're meaning if he decided to play as a Primarch, which, again, due to the fact that the Ultramarines are essentially Games Workshop's poster children, I suspect it would end up, or that would be the focus. And to me, that would just be so dadgum boring. That could be interesting. MM43's question, for those of you that are listening to this and not watching, is imagine if he did a backstory on erasing one of the two legions. That could be interesting. And I could easily see him playing as Layman Russ doing that particular course of action. That would be interesting and fun to watch, in my opinion. The other thing that would be good if he was to do the Heresy era would be a series focused on the Battle of Prospero and the immediate aftermath, because then he would essentially have two Primarchs that he could be playing potentially as, both of which are really entertaining. Okay, so
And I'm back.
Brian, awesome. Let's
Oh,
get
cool.
this.
You got it even bigger.
Okay, yeah, we'll just go ahead and leave it there because I don't think anyone really needs to see our ugly bugs when we're talking. Hey, Cliff 3188, if you want to jump in, you're welcome to do so. You've got the link in the Gilded.
Come on, boss man. Let's go. Get on here.
Okay, we are on to the 10th Legion Space Marines,
What happened to 8 and
the
9?
Iron Hands.
Oh,
Say again.
okay. We did 9. Okay, now I see.
Yep. Ninth is the one that I could literally do an entire stream on because
Yeah.
I'm just going to be honest, and I know this is going to award me a point. I'm a simp for Sanguinius. Oh, and I actually forgot to mention what their big curse is and why I'm such a fan of them.
What is their big curse?
They have anger management issues to such an extreme that they literally think that they are their Primarch getting murdered by his brother. In the Heresy era, anytime Sanguinius was wounded in battle, the psychic shockwave drove all of his legionaries that were present into a blood rage.
I think that's pretty ironic and appropriate.
Now, remember I mentioned that they're space vampires?
Yeah.
They have overdeveloped fangs and the unfortunate habit of, well, before battle, they share a tradition where they will slit a major artery, and before the slit closes, thanks to their hyperclotting capability, they will pour a few drops of their own vitae into a goblet. The entire squad will do this, and then everyone takes a drop from the goblet. Yeah, these guys take the concept of blood brothers to
a whole new
an
level.
Unfortunate extreme.
Yeah.
In MM43, it's not quite perfect cloning. It's more one of these things where, in the creation of a Space Marine, if you're an individual who is chosen and seen as strong enough to be able to bear the gene seed of a Primarch, you will have this organic gobbledygook installed into your body, and it influences your development throughout the remainder of your puberty and during the implantation of the other organs. So if your Primarch had a predilection towards wandering around in tights and singing Mel Brooks show tunes, you very well may have that predilection. Yes, that's a direct knock on Fulgrim, and no, I do not apologize. If your Primarch thought that wolves were the greatest things ever and wanted to raise an entire pack of them, you probably had that same predilection. Welcome, Cliff.
What's up?
Hey, buddy.
Not much. We're roughly halfway through discussing the 18 surviving legions.
Gotcha.
And from the conversation yesterday on Jimmy's stream, I think you know enough about 40K to be able to help add in some of the gray areas that I'm kind of glossing over.
A little bit.
I'm learning a lot.
So before we go further, of the 18 known Space Marine legions, which one would you claim allegiance to?
What's the one that Robert Guillaumin is in charge of?
Oh, you're an ultra smurf.
Yeah, why not?
I'm a blood.
Why fix what ain't broken? So.
like I said before, I know I'm earning a suspicion point for this. I don't care. I'm a simp for the Blood Angels.
Okay, fair enough.
So far, I'm leaning towards the Space Wolves. I'm really liking what their story was on them.
Yeah, just remember there are no wolves on Fenris. Allegedly.
Allegedly. I don't
But-
have my little clicky thing to do allegedly with.
Okay, but before I completely derail this stream by turning into a love letter to the Blood Angels, let's move on to the next
Yes.
legion in the roster, which is the 10th Legion, Iron Hands. Now, Cliff, so you know, I am literally reading the intro blurbs for each of the legions directly from the Warhammer Horus Heresy Age of Darkness rulebook.
Okay.
So this is I'm slightly paraphrasing because honestly, I don't want to read everything in here. Oh, the 7. MM43, I thought you were more flexible than Rogel Dorn. I guess you just enjoy fisting things. No, that's fair. That's fair. But Cliff, would you agree that of all the legions, the 7th is the one that would need gene therapy to be able to relax?
You're talking about the Blood Angels?
No, the Imperial Fists.
Gene therapy to relax, and yeah, probably a shit ton of the marijuana.
Yeah. Those guys, their idea of a party is getting an extra bit of whatever they consider cake in their field rations.
Oh God.
But the 10th Legion's Astartes, Iron Hands, renowned for their pride, their cold-hearted ferocity, and their utter remorselessness in battle. Good God, these guys are just bloodthirsty bastards in battle. Let's just put it that way. The Iron Hands were the hammer that shattered countless foes in the Emperor's quest to liberate humanity from the darkness of old night. Their primarch was Ferrus Manus, a bellicose and uncompromising warlord and a peerless weaponsmith, from whom the 10th Legion took its name and whose every command was to them inviolate law. Caught up in the machinations of the War Master's treachery, the Legion was undone by hubris and the blade of traitor both, and paid a heavy price in the brutal slaying of its primarch and the near crippling of its strength. Though left a shattered Legion, the cold fury of the Iron Hand's bitter vengeance would afterwards be writ across the very stars. Now, okay, MM43, I'm going to give you a pass on that because those guys do know how to party, and they did know how to throw a good party before they turned into absolute sex, drug, and rock and roll buttholes. The Emperor's Children. Such potential. And then they got Fulgrim. The Primarch of the Iron Hands has got to have one of the most on-point names of any of the Space Marines. Oh, and by the way, these guys are loyalists. Ferrus Manus, also known as the Gorgon. And I'm not gonna say that it looks like he decided to try to make out with a maul and a hammer at the same time. But if you described him that way, I wouldn't say you were wrong either. Not only is he visually ugly, his idea of appropriate use of resources is take hammer, smash nail. Sir, that's not a nail. What part of my instructions did you not understand? That could pretty much be a summation of his strategies. Cliff, am I wrong?
No.
All right. Now, with that being said, his best friend among his brother Primarchs was ironically Fulgrim. Those two were essentially the best buds that were ever buds. And then the heresy happened, first Fulgrim got a hold of a weird sword from a snake orgy temple. I hate saying that. I really do hate saying that. And he started listening to the voice in his head that was telling him to do things that would, quite frankly, make the alphabet soup community of the modern world go, that's a little too far. Okay, Brian, just to make your brain hurt a little bit more thinking about this, there's a certain internet company referred to as Black Dragon.
Yeah.
Fulgrim, host, Lair Temple, would look at them and go, amateurs. Again, Cliff, am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
And I'm trying to keep this YouTube friendly, because if I went into detail, this stream would get zapped.
Oh, God.
So this stream would get nuked from orbit with a follow-up Exterminatus barrage. But Ferrus Manus and Fulgrim, they were best buds. In fact, Fulgrim made the weapon that was Ferrus Manus's signature weapon for most of the Great Crusade, and vice versa. Because those two were so prideful, neither one could admit that the other one was a better smith. Is there a problem, Brian?
Oh, I'm on a Warhammer4000.com looking at what you're talking about and understanding it more.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, God.
Well, like I've said, I'm giving you the kind of the 20,000 foot overview, because if we were to deep dive into any of these, each one of them would be a stream in and of itself. And you're seeing that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, well, rather than beat Ferrus Manus's Legion to death any further, and if you know anything about Istvan 4, you already know where that's going. We're moving on to the next Legion. The 12th Legion, the World Eaters. Remember, the 11th is one of the expunged legions. Such potential with these guys. The 12th Legion were monsters long before Horus's rebellion. Of all the Space Marine legions of the Great Crusade, none were so savage and dreaded. They were the hounds of war that brought death as beasts, butchers and madmen. The merest whispers of their coming could quell rebellions and send armies to flight and terror. Tales of their predations and massacres were numberless, and their reputation was well earned. In their early days, they were an unrelentingly macabre but disciplined fighting force, which knew the virtues of tactics and weapons, and could adapt to meet any foe. These warhounds retained martial nobility beneath a film of gore. Under their Primarch, and later during the Age of Darkness, the World Eaters were stripped of what little remained of their restraint and humanity, becoming the basest weapons of war without nuance or wisdom. Their coming meant only brutal extermination by chain axe and bolt shell. Worlds drowned one by one in the blood of their inhabitants. Their Primarch is Angron. We are going to pause and go into a little bit of detail here. Because Angron, there's a theory that he was supposed to be the embodiment of the Emperor's compassion towards humanity.
His name would say otherwise.
Exactly.
Well, now here's the thing, though. And Cliff, do you know what it is that was put into his brain without his consent?
I got no clue.
The planet he landed on he was basically thrown into gladiatorial pits when it was found that he was a fearsome fighter from a very early age. However, there was one fight where he basically told the people that enslaved him he didn't want to kill the person that he was fighting. They took him out of the pit, took him down into a lab, and surgically implanted 2 cybernetic devices called the Butcher's Nails into his brain.
Oh.
These devices caused him immense pain when he experienced any emotion besides rage and any desire other than bloodshed. Taking what could have been a very effective, if restrained, warrior and turning him into a savage monstrosity who only felt joy in the act of causing other lives to end. He basically made a cloak of skulls. Now, when I said previously, all but one of the Primarchs managed to conquer the world that they had landed on, Angron is the one who failed. He did manage to leave a gladiatorial slave uprising, but he was literally moments away from being wiped out. And the night before the final battle that would have rendered him either a conqueror of his world or bleached bones in the desert, the Emperor came down to him and was like, look, you're not going to be able to win this. Come with me. I will give you command of a legion of warriors that you can use to help me cleanse the galaxy, but you're not going to win this. And I'm not sending any of my troops down here to help you with it. Angron basically told his father to go fornicate himself and get ready to die alongside his brethren gladiators.
Dang.
In the middle of the battle, the Emperor teleported him out of it and made him watch his brothers and sisters in arms be massacred. The very next thing that Angron did was beat a member of the Adeptus Custodes to death with his bare hands.
The Adeptus Custodes.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
And this one was fully armored.
Yeah.
Brian, we haven't gone into the Custodes this stream. Simple form. These are what Space Marines want to become.
Okay.
If using commando / secret military agencies as an example here, Delta Force is the best of the best in the on-the-books U.S. military.
Yep.
Mossad is probably best of the best covert operations in the world. Probably. These guys would look under their beds for custodes if the custodes were real.
Oh, jeez.
Cliff, is that underselling them or is that about accurate?
Yeah, it's about accurate.
These guys are textbook definition scary when they're sent into battle. And there's only ever 10,000 of them in existence anywhere in the 40K timeline.
Wow.
And for about 10,000 years, they stayed on Earth, never leaving the Imperial Palace. Their entire mission was to protect the Emperor. When Rabute Gilliman woke up and came back, he basically told him, you're needed out there. Leave however many you need to here, but get your golden armored butts out there and start doing your damn job again. And because that was the only Primarch that was loyal that came back to that point, They basically snapped to attention, gave a salute, sir, yes, sir, and went to muster. But again, that's a Primarch. Now, where Angeron is kind of a what you got?
Oh, nothing. I'm just looking at the page that you're on.
Now, with Angeron, he is kind of a tragic figure in the fact that the Emperor could have helped him to win that battle. As easily as he teleported Angeron out of that battle, he could have teleported a group of his custodes and possibly a couple companies of his, at that time, World Eaters, Warhounds, into that battle and managed to save Angeron's fellows. Instead, he chose the route of watching them get massacred. The Emperor is such a bad dad. And there'll be more details given at a later date on that one, but there's a reason that meme is out there. But we are going to move on from the 12th Legion to my least favorite of the Loyalists, the 13th Legion, Cliff's Boys in Blue, the Ultramarines. Before I go on, these guys are the stereotypical poster children of Games Workshop's Space Marines. Anytime you see promotional artwork of a Space Marine in Warhammer 40,000, unless it's directly advertising the new codex for whatever chapter is getting put out, it's an Ultramarine you're seeing.
I have one question, though, Mando.
Fire away.
What? Oh, fire away. Okay. If current day Marines eat crayons, what do these Ultramarines eat?
I don't even want to try to guess.
Highlighters?
Okay.
Well, no, the thing is,
I'm trying to make a bad joke, I know.
yeah, he was trying to make a joke there. The Space Marines in Warhammer 40K and 30K, I think, are actually based off of the British Royal Marines in concept, with a little bit of the United States Marine Corps.
So is it the special ed part of the United States Marine Corps, or is it?
I don't even want to try to guess. And MM43, that's a good answer. I don't know if it's the right answer, but that's a good answer. He says 55-gallon drums of wax. Okay, but on
With how
to
big those
the
guys
blurb.
are, it's almost the equivalent of a beer can for them, and then just crush the whole
May as
drum
well
against
be.
their head. Yeah, yeah.
Well, actually,
Love
would
it.
that mean the Space Wolves then use tanker trucks as a keg?
Yes.
Because they're the only chapter/legion that actually does alcohol benders.
That's fucking awesome.
Okay,
Be a tanker truck full of hard alcohol.
okay. Well, since I opened this door without really meaning to, I'm going to go ahead and walk through it and explain it. The enhancements Space Marines go through means that alcohol doesn't phase them.
Oh, wow.
So when Layman Russ landed on his homeworld Fenris, in order for him to get the same enjoyment from their equivalent of mead that his brethren on the planet did, they had to learn to ferment something much stronger. And one of the fandom jokes is that was the biggest improvement to quality of life for Space Marines when Layman Russ was found, because now they were able to get drunk.
So
But
technically, if alcohol doesn't affect them the way it affects us, they would technically be drinking because of they enjoy the flavor versus the effect.
basically, yeah.
They must have some good whiskey connoisseurs.
Assuming, of course, they even bother with whiskey.
Yeah.
Mm.
They may be doing that
All right.
Everclear.
All right. The third Legion, Astartes, the Ultramarines. The Ultramarines stood as one of the most powerful military forces in the Imperium, with an active fighting strength in the region of 250,000 Astartes, a sector-spanning domain under its lordship, and an unparalleled supply and trading infrastructure. Excuse me. That allowed it to withstand losses that might cripple other legions. It would be the legion's very strength and the power it could wield that would make it a prime target for the traitors' conspiracy to bring ruination to the 500 worlds of Ultramar. Okay. Robute Gilliman. He was the first of the Loyalist Primarchs to come back in modern 40k. He had been... There's a little bit of fast forwarding, but there was a duel between him and the traitor Serpent Boy Fulgrim, and he ended up getting his throat slit in such a way that he would not have come back from it. Instead, he was put in stasis. Little did anyone realize that Space Marines in stasis are basically like Chuck Norris taking a nap. They never really stop. The
Chuck
wound
Norris
was
doesn't
healing.
take naps.
He waits.
Exactly. His throat wound was healing in stasis. Given another 10,000 years, he might have woken up on his own and gone, "Can I have some water, please?" And scared the ever-living crap out of any of the honor guard that was present in the temple/shrine that he was residing in at the time.
Mm.
We're going to go ahead and touch on it, even though that isn't really pertinent. There is a meme out there about Robute Gilliman and a certain Eldari chick. Space Marines and Eldar do not get along. Space Marines do not like anything that even smells like an alien. And Eldar see humans the way we see chimpanzees. A fun curiosity. This Eldar chick was directly involved in waking Gilliman back up.
Hmm.
She fought alongside him for a short time and even accompanied him back to Terra, at least part way. Those two, there has been so much Rule 34 written with those two that it's not even close to funny. And literally, the closest thing to something like that those two, or that they had, was on Macragge in Gilliman's throne room /sanctum. They had a conversation where it was just Yvraine and Gilliman, where basically Yvraine said, "I will help you in the future, but you had better be damn sure you need it." They had a respectful conversation. And because Space Marines and Eldar hate each other, that's turned into a waifu category item. Cliff, you saw that in Gilded the other day.
Yep.
I'm not going to say that it's not interesting to look at, but when you know the lore, you know how inappropriate it is.
Oh, yeah.
Cliff, you have something you want to say?
No, I got
Or
nothing.
not,
I'm
Brian?
It looks like on your face that you have something that you want to say.
I'm just smiling like an idiot. That's it.
But that's because he knows we're both biting our tongue when it comes to Gilliman and Yvraine.
Yep.
You mentioned Rule 34. What is Rule 34?
It is
Anything on the internet can be turned into adult entertainment.
Oh. Okay.
Use your imagination.
Yep.
But also remember that given all the modifications Space Marines go through, they may or may not have a reproduction drive equivalent to what us normal humans do.
Oh, Lord.
So that makes that particular meme even more disturbing when you stop and think about it. But as far as the heresy goes, Gilliman, and this is part of the reason why I don't like the guy or the Ultramarines in general, he is a logistician beyond compare. He can look at the way a planet is set up, and he can find ways to make its supply chain more efficient, more effective, and less costly in the course of a matter of weeks, if not days. He literally wrote the book on how Space Marines in 40K fight. The book is called the Index Astartes, or no, the Codex Astartes. He literally wrote that book. He also basically took what happened in the heresy, examined it from multiple angles, including probably a colorectal exam, and decided this is why this was such a tragedy, and this is how we stop it from happening in the future. Gilliman is the reason that modern Space Marine chapters are limited to 1,000 warriors at any given time. And like I said, in the lore, he is the most bog standard, boring of the Primarchs. And of course, he's a loyalist. All right, moving on to the 14th Legion Astartes, the Death Guard. These are traitors, unfortunately. I say unfortunately because they do have some pretty interesting backstory. The warriors of the 14th Legion were the implacable heroes of unification. They were the stalwart fighters who made endurance under fire the noblest of pursuits, ever overcoming the most nightmarish foes in the most inhospitable of war zones. Their ordinal was synonymous with resilience and unshakable courage. For unflinching determination and victory by any means, they cast down alien tyrants and warlords across 1,000 worlds and more, consigning scores of bellicose xenostrains to extinction. Few legions had beginnings as glorious as the Death Guard, nor ends as tragic. From heights of splendor, the Legion and its warriors became the very thing they once fought tirelessly against: inhuman, unrecognizable, and soulless monsters of the dark, and the very stuff of nightmares. Their Primarch is Mortarion. He literally carries a scythe as his primary weapon. In 40K itself, they are plague bearers. Their Space Marine physiology making them capable of carrying uncounted horrific plagues, but never allowing them to succumb to said plagues.
Oof. Damn.
These guys would look at the illness that was unleashed on the world by a certain Asian company or country a few years ago
Oh, spicy flu.
and say, amateurs.
Mm-hmm.
You could hit one of them with a bullet laden with anthrax, smallpox, bubonic plague, and syphilis, and the only thing that would affect them was the bullet. Now, granted, Space Marine immune systems would probably laugh at all of those illnesses anyway, but details.
Mm-hmm.
But those are just illnesses we can use in the modern world to
give context.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Mortarion kind of managed to conquer his world, but he had his final kills stolen from him by the Emperor. And that's probably what caused him to turn traitor. As much as I hate to say this, the Death Guard, there was a period of time they could have gone either way. And then their Primarch was discovered. But we are going to move on from them because we are going to go into heresy territory with that, and I want to save that for the next stream.
Mm-hmm.
The 15th Legion, the Thousand Sons. Betrayal is a child of many sires. Power, hate, vengeance, shame, guilt, bitterness, viciousness, and callousness. All have played their part in the fall of those who turned on the Emperor. But to this list, 2 more must be added: hubris and blindness. While other legions walked into infamy at their own choosing, the Thousand Sons were plunged into that state, first by their own pride, second by the treachery of those who they trusted, and third by the Imperium itself. The Thousand Sons were a Space Marine legion bound up with occult lore, mysticism, and the otherworldly powers of the Psyker. It was these esoteric arts of war that made it one of the most formidable of legions, but also one of the most distrusted, and would eventually see it subject to the Emperor's judgment. Tainted by mutation and touched by the warp, the fall of the Thousand Sons seemed certain in retrospect, but that certainty is false. Another path might have waited for the 15th Legion had not fate been so cruel. As it is, the story of the Thousand Sons is not one of darkness, but of a light that drew a legion and a Primarch higher and higher, until they could no longer see the boundaries of obedience left far below them. Their Primarch is Magnus the Red, also known as the Cyclops. And if you look at his miniature, you could also call him Nipple Horns. They were all individuals known as Psychers. These are people who use the power of the warp and their own minds to influence the world around them. Imagine a sorcerer from D&D that has all the training of a paladin and all the discipline of his sorceress abilities. Have you played Skyrim?
I have.
Or any of the Elder Scrolls games?
Brian is no. I've played
okay. I'm trying to think of a good analogy to really drive home what the Thousand Sons were. All right, you've seen Star Wars, right, Brian?
Yeah.
Imagine the Jedi, only instead of having the Jedi Sith dichotomy, they had no concept of a dark side of the Force. They just saw the Force as a tool that could be used, and they just had to be careful that they didn't draw too deep from it and cause themselves to start mutating. That is essentially the way the Thousand Sons saw their psionic abilities.
Okay.
More detail will be gone into at a later time, but before the heresy began, there was a trial of psychic potential done at a location called the Council of Nicaea. And the Emperor decided that psychic abilities should no longer be utilized by the Adeptus Astartes, which basically meant that the entire shtick of the Thousand Sons was thrown straight out the window, and they were told, you cannot do that anymore. And like anyone who's told they can't use their favorite toy, they ran home and cried for the next decade. Well, during this time, they were still practicing their psychic/mystic arts. And somehow Magnus got word that his brother Horus was about to turn to evil. And he figured it'd be a good boy thing for him to do to warn his dad, the Emperor. Now, Brian, Cliff, if your father told you you could no longer use something, would you then use that something to warn your father about something bad that another one of your siblings was about to do?
No.
Maybe.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Emperor was working on a secret project in his basement that when Magnus basically sent his warning to the Emperor, he caused an opening straight to the bowels of hell in the Emperor's basement, ruining his project and never even delivering his message. Because he punched through the psionic barriers and realized, oh, shit, I shouldn't have done this. And rather than telling Dad, hey, Horus is about to bomb an entire planet into nothingness for no good reason and kill about half of his guys that are still loyal to you, you might want to put a stop to that. I'm going home now. Bye. If he had done that, he might have managed to at least temper what came next. Brian, have you seen Revenge of the Nerds?
No.
Was that a yes or a no?
Revenge of the Nerds?
Yeah.
No, I have not seen that.
Okay. Cliff, have you seen that movie?
Yes, I have. Hey, why did they
Of
call you
the
Booger?
space-
I don't know.
Okay. Of the Space Marine legions, would you classify the Thousand Sons as basically being like the nerds?
Yeah, because they're led by the biggest nerd of all.
Now, who would you say is the jocks using that example?
In that case, it would have to be Horus's group.
Not quite, but you're on the right track, unfortunately. Layman Russ and his legion were sent to the Thousand Sons homeworld. Their original orders were to arrest Magnus and his top lieutenants and bring them back to Terra to explain why Magnus broke Daddy's toys. Horus got a hold of the orders and changed it to Dad wants your brother dead and all of his kids taken out too. And Layman Russ, not bothering to verify the orders, was like, okay. Because at that time, Horus was still the War Master and still second only to the Emperor in military chain of command in the Imperium. So Layman Russ led the space wolves to Prospero and burned it, wiping out all but roughly 1,000 of the 15th Legion.
Damn.
And we just lost Cliff. I guess he was a little too close to Prospero.
I don't know. Ah, here he is.
Sorry.
Hey,
Press the button again.
did,
Same thing happened last night.
did you manage to explain to the Did you manage to explain to the inquisitorial agent that you weren't causing a problem?
Yes, very quickly.
Because we are talking about something that in 40K would be classified as heresy. Because unfortunately, the Thousand Sons are treated as traitors. Now, granted, their actions since the burning of Prospero have kind of cemented that, but details. Okay, we are going to move on to. Well, actually, before we move on, would you agree that Magnus's story is probably the most tragic of the traitor legions we've discussed so far?
Yeah, because just how he got screwed over was just mostly a clerical error.
Basically.
Yeah.
And granted, he did screw up by not saying and not explaining why he broke through the garage wall
Yeah.
and opened the gate to hell into the basement, but doesn't necessarily warrant having the equivalent of a rabid dog thrown onto your ass. Moving on to the 16th Legion. This one has two names that we can use interchangeably. When they were still loyalists, they were the Luna Wolves. And technically they were still loyalists for a short time after this name change, but they became known as the Sons of Horus after Horus's promotion to War Master. Here's the blurb. The Sons of Horus were made by fate the scions of heresy, the sons of the arch-traitor, and alongside their sire, first in infamy. And their name would resound as a curse throughout the scattered and war-torn realms of humanity. Such is their crime that it is easy now to forget that the past was very different. And once they and their master were lauded above all the warriors of the legions Astartes and favored in the Emperor's sight. Born as the 16th legions Astartes on Terra, they would rise to greatness as the Luna Wolves, then fall into the abyss as the angels of ancient myth, bearing the name of their Primarch. Long before those dark days, they fought at the Emperor's side on Terra and throughout the early Great Crusade. They were as stalwart and indefeatable as any, their actions serving to exemplify all that was to be a warrior of the legions Astartes. Brutal, ruthless, and unwavering, but also honorable, and once loyal beyond question. Their history is the history of ambition, is the history of the ambition of the Imperium itself, and the flaws that broke the dreams of unification and glory asunder. Their Primarch is Horus Lupercal. He was the first Primarch to have been found, and may still have been either a child or very young adult when he was found by the Emperor. He fought alongside the Emperor for longer than any of his brother Primarchs. He also gathered much more respect among any of the Primarchs than anybody else. All of his siblings would come to him for advice on various tactical actions and various problems plaguing their legions. He is the only one of the Primarchs who knew of the Blood Angel's flaw before the heresy itself kicked off. You got a question there, Brian?
No.
Went on a planet called Davin. He was injured by a weapon that was essentially programmed to be able to wipe him off the map. And that weapon was what led directly to him turning to evil. We're going to cover that more detail in the heresy itself. But if it wasn't for somebody from another legion, cough, cough, going to talk about them next, getting a hold of that weapon and somehow smuggling it to somebody who betrayed Horus even more directly, the heresy may not have happened in the way that the later Imperium came to know it. So, moving on, we've only got a couple more legions left. Actually, we're in the last 4, so
Final stretch.
the 17th legions Astartes, the word bearers, more traitors. Yay, more traitors! Woohoo! If there is a hierarchy of treachery, then the word bearers sits in the highest circle. Once the most devoted and rigorous of warriors, it was not enough that they fell, but they pulled their brother legions into the abyss with them, while the treachery of others came like a storm, or the final flowering of a long-buried seed. The word bearer's betrayal was poison distilled over long years. From their founding, their devotion to the Imperium and the Great Crusade was beyond question. They were the bearers of the ideals of the Imperium, of its vision for the future of humanity. Their loyalty was never to be questioned, only the form of their devotion. But now their loyalty can never be seen as anything other than a mask, and their fanaticism is a flaw which would undermine all they once sought to build. Once they were the bringers of light into the benighted realms of humanity, but during the heresy, they brought only the poisoned darkness of old night, seeking to dominate and bind demons of the warp. They marched alongside the denizens of the abyss and rendered eternal damnation to any who dared oppose them. Their primarch was Logar Aurelian. These guys are religious zealots. They would literally build temples to the emperor when the emperor was still saying, "I'm not a god, stop worshiping me." Lorgar literally wrote the book that became the basis of the imperial cult in later 40K. He also wrote the book that Horus read to become a chaos worshiper himself. So there is literally no man, woman, child, alien, or demon in the Warhammer 40K universe that Lorgar hasn't effed over in some way, shape, or form. Anything you want to add to that one, Cliff?
I got nothing.
So I think we beat that one to death. Because honestly, we go any further, we're going to be crossing into territory that I want to save for a future stream. Okay, the 18th Legion Astartes, the Salamanders. In the Great War of the Horus Heresy, many deeds of infamy and valor were writ upon the bloody stars, and at the center of this maelstrom lay the Salamanders' Legion, betrayed, struck down, and laid low, yet ever resolute against the foe. There are few legions that have paid such a high price for their loyalty and honor as the Salamanders. There are fewer still who have so willingly and often shed their own blood in mankind's defense against the measure and against their or beyond their measure and due. The Salamanders are such a legion, and though driven to near destruction not once but time and again, its warriors have each time arisen from the ashes of war, stronger and tempered like the peerless steel blades fashioned in the legendary forges of their homeworld, unbroken, undefeated, and unstintingly true to their cause. Their primarch is Vulcan. All right, Brian.
Yeah,
You
I'm
might
sorry,
like
but
these. You're okay. You might like these guys. The Salamanders and their primarch Vulcan are quote unquote the nicest legion of Space Marines. If they are sent into to defend a planet, they will do everything in their power to defend the populace of said planet. They will take losses that other Space Marines would deem unnecessary to save a bus full of school children. Now, that being said, they are also physically the most intimidating of the baseline Space Marines to look at. All the other Space Marine chapters or legions appear more or less like normal humans, just in elevated size. The Salamanders have red eyes, black skin, and essentially look like Hellspawn when they're not in their armor. You would look at these guys and think, he is going to use me as a snack and not think about anything else. And while he's looking at you, if you're a civilian, he's thinking, okay, how quickly can I get this person out of the combat zone so I can get back to murdering the things that I'm here to murder?
Yeah, that's what soldiering does, technically.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's essentially what they are. Now, there is a caveat there. Unfortunately for their reputation, their Primarch had an unfortunate incident involving a flamethrower and an Eldar child. We're not going to go into details. You can find it on the wiki, but let's just say it is so completely out of character that a lot of people wonder if it was written as a meme.
Something ended up crispy.
Very much so.
Oh God.
This next legion that
It
we're going to
happens.
discuss. This next legion we're going to discuss. Quoth the Raven, nevermore. The 19th Legion, the Raven Guard. Named for an ancient Terran herald of fate and messenger of death, the Raven Guard served the Emperor faithfully throughout the glories of the Unification and Great Crusade, ever ready to overthrow the tyrant and the oppressor, and liberate the scattered realms of mankind in the name of justice. From its earliest days, the warriors of the Legion were known as cunning and patient hunters, adept at biding their time until the moment to strike was at hand. As masters of guile, subtlety, and reconnaissance and infiltration, their doctrines exemplified speed, stealth, and precision above all else, striking from the shadows with shocking strength. Their Primarch is Corvus Corax, also known, appropriately enough, as the Raven Lord. In fact, Mark VI Space Marine armor is known as Corvus pattern armor because of the beaked helms and the fact that that armor was tested out extensively by the Raven Guard. It is armor that came to exemplify the 19th Legion, and they had more suits of it during the heresy than any save Horus's Legion. They are covert ops specialists. You want a site reconned and all of its secrets laid bare? You send in the Raven Guard. So, yeah. I think they deserve to be called loyalists. And if you have them in a stand-up fight, you're misusing them. Do you use a scout sniper in a stand-up firefight, or do you let him go around to the flanks and try to find or pick out enemy commanders?
You let him run around and do what he needs to do.
Yeah. You kind of do the same thing with the Raven Guard, unless you want to cause a massacre of the Raven Guard.
They're basically fisters, forward observers. And you let them go do what they want to do, and then what they do is they find the targets that need to be targeted and call them in and drop bombs on them.
Yeah, you could say that. That's a fair assessment.
That's how my understanding of it is with what you described to me.
Yep, that's a fair assessment. Okay, the final Legion, the 20th Legion Astartes. Ironically enough named the Alpha Legion. Of all the mighty forces the Imperium commanded during the Great Crusade, there was none so wound about with falsehood, supposition, and paradox as the 20th Legion. Any study of the 20th Legion is fraught with difficulty, contradiction, and deliberate misdirection. All of this is a lie. And uncovering the truth when applied to such a study is a vain hope. This is the case even with a record such as this, compiled with the highest of authorities and the most extensive reach possible. Perhaps some measure of truth may be found in the lies of the secret history of the Alpha Legion. Nope. No can do. Never gonna find it. The 20th Legion was a highly independent weapon that neither the Emperor nor later the War Master could fully control. It was a twisting serpentine thing of formless shadows, as dangerous and venomous as the multi-headed monster of ancient myth that in latter days became its sigil. As a force dedicated to the arts of guile, subterfuge, infiltration, and counterintelligence, the Legion's covert efforts were intended to sow dismay and dismantle a foe's resolve and defenses piecemeal, before landing an overwhelming killing blow utilizing every one of the myriad weapons and war machines granted by the Legiones Astartes. Although in many cases these protracted and complex operations were the means and ends, and also were the means and the ends also, for the Legion was both unpredictable and delighted in causing strife. Its primarchs were Alfarius and Omegon. They were twins, allegedly. These guys are so convoluted that even the novel that follows them in the Horus Heresy straight up says multiple times in the book, this is a lie. If you ever think you know the truth about the Alpha Legion, you will get slapped across the head so hard by Gibbs that you'll wonder what side of the planet you're actually on. There are so many half-truths, misdirections, and reappropriations of things with the Alpha Legion that no one has a good idea where they actually stand. There's thought that they only joined up with Horus during the heresy as a means to serve the Emperor to defeat Horus from the inside. There's also rumor that one of the Primarchs in the Alpha Legion was traitor, the other was not. No one knows which one Rogel Dorn killed years later. And then there's also the theory that they were playing playing everyone against the middle for so long that they no longer know which side they serve.
Interesting.
Very.
There were times during the Horus Heresy where they would be sent to battle against a loyalist legion, and literally all they would do is just sit there in space, shadowing their intended target and never actively engaging.
Seems kind of like a waste. Seems like a waste of a Primarch's time.
Well, that's just it. These guys love mind games way too much. Quite honestly, if they were to fall in with one of the Chaos Powers, I would see them as going with Zeech, the Changer of Ways, only because of the fact that these guys are so convoluted that only Zeech would have even the slightest chance of an idea of figuring out just what the heck they're playing at. And even then they would be like, nope, you're wrong, try again. And MM43, I can't blame you there. There is so much ambiguity that there is a lot of fun you can have with them. But ladies or gentlemen of the panel, and ladies and gentlemen of the audience, if there are still anyone actually watching and not just us monitoring our own stream, that is what I had intended to go over tonight with the introductory to the Space Marine Legions. I am planning next week a 20,000 foot overview of the Horus Heresy itself. If you guys enjoyed the Star Wars prequel trilogy, or you enjoy just war stories in general, you will love the Heresy. It is something that is a Greek tragedy level event ramped up to 11. But that being said, we've been going for about 2.5 hours. I think it's time to go ahead and call this one. Gentlemen, have I inspired either of you to possibly go digging into a little bit more of the lore of Warhammer 40K after today?
For me, the only thing I know of Warhammer is from Hammer and Bolter, because I've watched that animated series, which is really good, for what it was, and I might just go play Space Marine tonight.
It's not the worst. It's not the worst example of the 40K universe. It's not the best, but it's not the worst.
Yeah.
Hey, MM43, I don't blame you there. There's a lot to it.
Sounds like
So,
it.
Yeah.
so Brian, have I inspired you to go looking into any further?
Yeah, I may. When I get some free time.
And are you still a Space Wolf aficionado, you think? Or
Yeah, I still kind of lean towards them. I kind of like how they operate by what you told me.
yeah. A good book for them that actually talks about the fall of the Thousand Suns is Prospero Burns. I don't remember if that's the one from the Space Wolves or the Thousand Suns perspective. But that one definitely shows what happened. In fact, let me see something here. I think. Okay, here we go. Do they still have a list of books in the series? Yes, they do. Okay. Prospero Burns will be the book that describes the events of the fall of Prospero from the Space Wolves perspective.
Okay.
And that also gives you a really interesting insight into one of the more unique Space Marine legions. Granted, they're not one of my favorites because honestly, I'm not a big fan of Vikings in general, but they're still a very interesting legion in concept and execution.
Okay.
But all that being said, do either of you have any final thoughts you wish to leave us with for tonight?
No, because a lot of this stuff, with how much detail there was, it's like a shotgun blast to the face.
Well, that's why I said we're doing this from a 20,000 foot overview.
Even then, it's still the same.
I know. Just imagine if we were at a 10,000 foot overview.
Oh god.
And bear in mind, I've been a fan of 40K in a couple of different forms since roughly 2006. So I've been following this for some time, and I still look at some of the lore and go, what the hell?
Heck, in 2 years, you'll be following it for 20 years.
I know.
That's crazy.
Even crazier, this isn't the first war game I got into that has this kind of lore. I started my wargaming hobby with BattleTech.
I've heard of that.
Have you ever heard of Mech Warrior?
No, but I've heard
Okay.
of BattleTech.
Well, Mech Warrior is the computer version of BattleTech that most people have heard of. And we might do a stream on that too one of these days. If you think 40K's loaded, whew, you ain't seen nothing. Well, you're talking about a game system that the Army at one time considered using as a training aid for tactical
Yeah.
thought. So, on that note, we're going to go ahead and call it into this, gentleman. I'm going to drop you guys backstage. You can stick around for a couple minutes or you can duck out. It's up to you. Thank you for joining in, and I hope you all have a good night.
Yes, sir.
Get this screen. I'm going to drop you guys off.